One of the biggest questions I get asked is about recipe conversions, converting your beloved recipes or your favorite recipes to freshly milled wheat. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this video. Hey everyone, welcome back to Grains and Grit. My name is Felicia. On this channel, we talk about real whole grains from a biblical perspective. So if you're new here, welcome. So if you notice, I'm not in my kitchen in my normal venue. I'm actually we're having a nice, beautiful day here in Florida. And so I decided to film outside, basically in my pasture. So you're gonna hear geese, chickens, all the things probably. Okay, so in this video, let's talk about recipe conversions. I'm gonna just be giving y'all 4 tips about converting recipes from regular store-bought flour over to freshly milled wheat. And then I'm going to be giving y'all some examples of what I have done to convert recipes myself. So tip number 1 is just knowing what type of wheat to use. If you're new to using freshly milled grains, it may have surprised you that we have a multitude of wheat berries to choose from when it comes to baking our recipes. Typically what you have in the store is you go into the store to buy store-bought flour, and you have bread flour and you have all-purpose flour. And then you maybe have, cake flour. In the world of whole grains, a lot more options, but don't freak out. The basic thing that you need to know is that if you are baking a yeast bread, something that needs to rise, you're typically going to want to stick to a hard wheat, whether that be hard red or hard white. And then if you're wanting to make a baked good, so non-yeast breads, cookies, cakes, those type of items, those are typically, you're gonna wanna stick with a soft white wheat. And keep it simple. Don't worry about using ancient grains or any other type of specialty whole grain to mill until you've mastered that recipe with the conversion. You typically turn around the bags of all-purpose flour and bread flour. It will tell you the type of wheat that they have used, and most of the time it is a hard red wheat, especially with your all-purpose flour and definitely your bread flour. Those are typically using hard red wheat anyway. They may have added some other things like barley flour to soften it a little bit, but that's generally what all-purpose flour is, definitely bread flour. And then there are brands like Lily's that everyone swears to use for biscuits and cakes because that's made with soft white wheat flour. But bottom line, yeast breads, just go ahead and guarantee a hard red or hard white wheat. Baked goods, a soft white wheat. Tip number 2, when using a soft white wheat, I do not know why this possibly is. All I know is it's a general rule when you are using soft white wheat and the recipe calls for all-purpose flour. For every 2 to 3 cups of all-purpose flour used, you may need to increase the soft white wheat flour that you use by about a 1/4 cup. Again, I do not know why. You especially might see this when it comes to cookies, because if the cookies are too flat, then you have not used enough flour. If the cookies are too domed and they haven't flattened out a bit, then you have used too much flour. But I have found in the past, like with my cookie recipes, that sometimes I do need to increase my soft white wheat just a little bit, but this is going to be trial and error that you're going to have to just learn. Tip number 3 is just know that the more that you work with freshly milled grains, the better your instincts are going to be, and the more confident you will become whenever it comes to actually converting recipes calling for store-bought flour. For me, I generally know, whenever I'm going for a specific type of bread. Like recently I posted a focaccia bread video, and because of the experience I know, with wheat berries, I generally knew that, hey, I'm probably gonna wanna use a combination of hard white wheat and soft white wheat to get what I'm going for. But do not be discouraged if your conversions fail at first, especially if you're new to freshly milled wheat, because this is just going to take some patience, time, and experience to get better at. And tip number 4, and this is one of my biggest tips, when you are converting a recipe to freshly milled wheat, is first of all, actually make the recipe with the flour that it calls for. So if it calls for store-bought all-purpose flour, make it with that first. And there are two reasons for this. One is to make sure that, first of all, you even like the recipe. And I'll give you examples of this later whenever I talk about my experience, but you're gonna wanna make sure that you even like the recipe before converting it. So that's the first thing you wanna try, make sure you like the recipe. And two, if it's a recipe you've never tried before, use the store-bought flour called for when you're making it, so you know the idea, the goal at the end that you're trying to accomplish. You're going to know generally, what the type of dough should feel like, or the consistency of the dough, what the final product is that you're going for. And once you have that in mind and have some experience making it just with store-bought flour, then start converting it over to freshly milled wheat, and then you'll have a better idea of, I think I need to add some more flour to this, or maybe I need less flour or more liquids based on what it was typically looking like with store-bought flour. Do know it will never look exactly like store-bought flour, as many of you probably have already figured out, but it will give you a general idea of what you're going for. And finally, let's talk about, I'm going to give you some examples of my own process of what I do when I'm trying to convert recipes. But before we do that, let's have a word from today's sponsor. Now is an excellent time to answer a question that I receive, and that is, Felicia, where do you get all of your grains? Where's your favorite place to shop for grains? Where can you buy a grain mill, the Bosch Universal Mixer, the Anarska mixer, all of these things pertaining to milling your grains? So glad you asked, because my favorite place to shop is definitely Pleasant Hill Grain. And the reason why is not only are they the cleanest grains that I have ever received, but they literally have everything that we need, especially for those who are wanting to get started and just want to shop at one place without giving business to the big box companies like Amazon and Walmart. Pleasant Hill Grain is a family-owned company. Wonderful, wonderful customer service, and everything is shipped to your house. Just go to grainsandgrit.com/PHG. And thank you very much, Pleasant Hill Grain, for being a sponsor to Grains and Grit. We love you. All right, so some examples of what I've done in the past whenever I've been trying to figure out a recipe with freshly milled wheat, and all that I have are recipes with store-bought flour. And I basically just do the tips that I've given you, where I first of all make sure that I have a recipe that I know I love, that it works, it's perfect, and then I start converting from there. I check to see, is this a baked good? Then I know I want soft white wheat. If it's a yeast bread, I know I'm gonna want a hard wheat. And then I just go off based on my experience of using these whole grains to determine if I want a combination of different wheats, stick with one type of wheat, so on and so forth. So some examples of this is my biscuit recipe that I had done a video a while ago, and I struggled so much with finding the perfect biscuit recipe that I was going for. I tried ones that were already using freshly milled wheat. I tried ones with store-bought flour, and it took me forever to even find a recipe that I liked. And then finally, I stumbled upon Jill Winger's biscuit recipe that's in her Cook the Prairie Homestead. Love that cookbook. And I tried that biscuit recipe with just store-bought flour and follow directions that she said. And that's when I realized this is it. This is the biscuits that I'm going for. And then I was able to start working on converting that over to freshly milled wheat. So for me, I had to learn, I knew immediately that I wanted a soft white wheat because it wasn't a yeast bread. And I'm going for like the lightest, fluffiest biscuit. So I'm definitely gonna want a soft white wheat for that. And then I realized other things like, I don't need as much buttermilk for that. If you've looked at that recipe before, I never actually had to double the buttermilk when I doubled the amount of flour. And I would not necessarily have known that if I had not first created it with store-bought flour to know generally the consistency of the dough that I was going for. And when I started adding that buttermilk in, realizing, whew, I don't need as much with freshly milled wheat. The other example is with flour tortillas, which is coming out in a few weeks. That is March recipe, first Friday in March for our Make Bread 365 challenge. And so I've been experimenting to get flour tortillas, and I had a goal in mind of what I was doing, but I couldn't even find a recipe with store-bought flour that I liked. And eventually I did. And when I finally did it and I made sure that I knew how to make it with store-bought flour, that it was what I was wanting, and then I was able to take that and start experimenting with converting it over to freshly milled wheat. And I'll be talking about that in that video, but you gotta wait a few weeks for it. I'm not giving you the flour tortilla recipe right now. It's coming in March of 2023. So if you're watching this video after that, then it should be posted. So there you go. That is just the general idea of converting recipes. So now take those beloved recipes from grandma that you have, you already know that you love them, and start trying to convert it over to freshly milled wheat. And it is something that can be done, but just remember, it still will look a little bit different and taste different, of course, than with store-bought flour. You're not gonna get the 110% exactly the same with freshly milled grains that you do with store-bought flour, for obvious reasons. Store-bought flour has no bran, no germ, you know, things like that. It is gonna look different, but they can come extremely close, if not better, than those original recipes. So hopefully this was helpful for you guys. As always, comment below if you have any questions. I will try to get to them. I always try to answer questions the day the videos come out, but after that, I can't necessarily get to all your questions. With that, do know that we do have an elite membership group where you do get me personally and be able to ask questions, and I respond to you, and I'll link that below as well. As always, I hope you'll have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next week. Bye.